day has come that many of you anticipated. I would like to just bring your attention to the page of acknowledgments, so I won't spend time doing that, except I left out my good friends Robinson and Isaac Muir, who are doing my recording engineering today, so thank you for that. So I welcome you and thank you so much for coming today, especially those of you taking time out of your work time to come to this awkward time of 2 o'clock for a recital. I'm excited. I'm excited and privileged to present to you today the music of Stephen Hatfield. He is one of the most intelligent, creative, clever, and humorous people I have ever met. His music is exciting, inspiring, and just a blast to perform. But don't just take my word for it. Let me give you the opinions of some others. Dr. Solveig Holmquist, Western Oregon University Professor Emeritus, offers this observation, quote, Hatfield's music is an ideal teaching tool, simultaneously engaging the mind, body, and spirit. All of his work is so appealing and well-crafted that singers enjoy the process of discovery that the music invariably offers. Each and every piece has interesting, yet challenging material for each voice part, possesses a depth of meaning, and feels good to the voice. Noted choral director and former King Singers member Bill Chilcott says of Hatfield's music, quote, his voice is completely unique in the choral world, and no choir should be without his music in their repertoire. Jean Ashworth Bartle of the Toronto Children's Chorus simply states of Hatfield, a genius. So who is Stephen Hatfield, the composer? He is best known for his pioneering work in multiculturally influenced choral works and has been in demand internationally as a clinician and conductor. Hatfield has been commissioned to write new pieces for numerous choral groups over the years for over 200 times. Before his career as a composer, he was an English teacher with no aspirations of having a music career of any sort, even though he had gone through life acquiring many music skills and many music experiences. He has received national recognition for his poetry from the Canada-Ontario Arts Commission. He writes the lyrics for nearly all of his compositions. From the over 450 emails that I have from him, it is clear to me that there's no possibility of discussing this multidimensional man's multidimensional music in one dissertation. There are many possible topics concerning his music which one could pursue further research. This will be the first dissertation on Stephen Hatfield, and I hope it will spawn more dissertations about him and his work. For this lecture in my dissertation, I will demonstrate 3 of Stephen Hatfield's definitive idiomatic compositional techniques. 1, how he combines traditional folk material with original material or original text, or both. 2, how he assimilates aspects of a cultural style and then writes in that style without quoting any actual melodies from that culture to compose an entirely original work. And 3, how he combines different cultural styles into an original work. There are a few terms that we need to define to understand today's lecture. Let's first consider the term multicultural. This is a term that is difficult to pin down in that there are many published definitions, but for our purposes we will go with this one from noted music education historian and researcher Therese M. Volk, who says that it is, quote, a broad spectrum of music cultures, primarily focusing on ethnocultural characteristics, close quote. Ethnocultural characteristics will be one of the foci in this document in the discussion of Hatfield's music. Stephen Hatfield, however, considers all music to be multicultural, including pop, rock, jazz, and blues. In other words, any indigenous music of any culture of any time period. Stephen Hatfield is all about the human experience, and if humans are involved in making the music, it is world music to him. Although Stephen Hatfield is classified as a multicultural composer and arranger, he is not a multicultural composer in an ethnomusicological sense. He does not collect ethnocultural music for the sake of preservation or archiving. Rather, he collects multicultural materials to serve as his artistic palette from which to create meaningful material, musical and human experience for the singers. Hatfield says that once he found himself in the music classroom, quote, "The pedagogical possibilities of using multicultural materials in listening, performance, and compositional activities were becoming a mission with me. I wanted world music to expand the students' horizons and increase their sense of human empathy." The terms chant and ostinato as mainstays of Hatfield's musical building blocks will receive much focus in this document. The New Harvard Dictionary, as applicable to Hatfield's compositional techniques, gives one definition of chant as to sing a single pitch or a limited range of pitches repetitively. The term ostinato, as defined in Grove's Music Online, refers to the repetition of a musical pattern many times in succession, while other musical elements are generally changing. Hatfield feels that these definitions, though objectively sound, still require further dimension. Quote, "I agree with these definitions of chant and ostinato, but they do not attempt to explain the emotional, psychological, spiritual, and sensual effects of listening to, or even better, participating in, both chant and ostinato, which, though constructed differently, both affect me with a sense of transcending time and achieving a numinous, luminous, alternate state of being. The fact that both chant and ostinato are so ancient and ubiquitous in human culture is part of the sensation of transcending time. For when you participate in these musical forms, you are linking minds with the first human musicians on the planet. You are able to pass the torch on because you've become a living embodiment of that fire." Close quote. Other important terms that need to be defined for this study are the Hatfield hybrid, the deep Hatfield hybrid, and cultural mashup. Those terms will be defined later in this lecture. So Stephen Hatfield had no intentions of pursuing a musical career. Having dismissed such a thought in his youth, a career in music was not even remotely on his adult mind. He became an English teacher. Leading up to his career as a composer was a lifelong journey of musical experiences that shaped his compositional techniques. Let us look at the influences in his life that led to this compositional style by looking at his biography through his multicultural and musical experiences. Stephen Hatfield was born in 1956 in South Westminster, British Columbia, Canada, and currently resides in Victoria, British Columbia. From birth, Hatfield was exposed to multicultural influences. Hatfield's grandfather established an Anglican church in a Kwakiutl Aboriginal community on Vancouver Island. Hatfield's grandfather and father integrated with the community. According to Hatfield, quote, "They studied the language, lived and ate the way the community lived and ate, and my father dated Aboriginal girls, which back in the late 40s and early 50s would have raised many a white eyebrow." Close quote. Hatfield's father even became blood brothers with the chief of the Kwakiutl Chief Jimmy Seawood. Like his father, Hatfield's father became an Anglican priest. Hatfield says of his father's influence, quote, "When I was small, his services were very much high Anglican, and it was good training for a boy with artistic leanings to see his father participating in rituals of color, dress, visual symbolism, and elevated language." Close quote. Hatfield's mother's use of international music in concerts and pageants for his father's church services at Christmas were thrilling for him. His grandparents had a large and eclectic record collection which he played all day that influenced his musical perspective and was an intense part of his life for 9 years. His uncle Charlie was a former vaudeville performer with whom Hatfield spent much time from 4 to 12 years old, and he taught the young Hatfield his repertoire of old vaudeville songs. While yet at a very young age, Hatfield's mother started teaching him the piano. Reminiscing on this experience, Hatfield says it was not just about the piano, but his mother was highly influential in his musical thinking. Quote, "When I was playing Messiaen during my adolescence, my mother expressed her pleasure at his use of consecutive fifths, and that comment whipped open my mind the way a magician can whip a tablecloth from under the plates and glasses. It was the first comment of that kind I had ever heard, the first time my attention was drawn to the emotional effects of such a choice, fifths or sixths, close quote. Living in an Aboriginal community and far from other children until he was 16 years old, the young Hatfield had plenty of time on his hands. As a toddler, Hatfield conducted music he heard on the radio. As a young child, he started writing literature and music. Hatfield states, quote, "I was writing my own books from an early age and began to compose little pieces on the piano. I still remember one, March of the Insects, from when I was 7 or 8. I had the creative itch to an extent that startles me today. My industry and motivation were endless," close quote. His solitary time was partially spent studying instrumental score writing, and as a young child and adolescent, attempted his first orchestral scores. Owing to demand from the music programs in the schools he attended and his father's church, he would be called upon to transpose, arrange, and transcribe. He composed various pieces: a Christmas oratorio, 2-tone poems for concert band, a quintet for 4 saxophones and bassoon, piano pieces, and choir pieces. Hatfield's mother taught him piano up until 5th grade when he began lessons outside of the home. This new piano teacher had him compose pieces from the chord progressions of the etudes he was studying. Hatfield also says of this era, quote, "And there were the counterpoint exercises which continue to influence me as my work, regardless of the style, tends towards the contrapuntal," close quote. Though Hatfield had childhood aspirations of becoming a composer, as he grew up and attended school, he lost confidence in his musical abilities when comparing himself with others and turned his interest to literature and philosophy. He received his bachelor's and master's in English from York University. He received his bachelor's of education at the University of Toronto. And throughout college, Hatfield had absolutely no thought of pursuing music as a career in any form. The closest he came to the arts in college when he was decorated by Canada's Governor General for his research linking the arts with philosophy and physics. After receiving his bachelor's of education, Hatfield taught high school English literature at Cawthra Park High School in Ontario. Hatfield was asked by his principal to start an extracurricular choir that would meet once a week with a caveat that there was no budget. Out of necessity, Hatfield was compelled to compose all of the music for this group. It was here that his choral composing began in earnest. In his last year as a high school teacher, his jazz and concert choirs won gold medals in a national competition, garnering the attention of Doreen Rao, choral music editor at publisher Boozy and Hawkes. And this led to his first choral works being published and a subsequent long-term relationship with Boozy and Hawkes, one of the major choral music publishers. Even though Stephen Hatfield, as a college student, was well on his way to an English teaching career, much of his compositional formative influences occurred during this time. Hatfield was a collector of world music recordings during the late 70s and early 80s. This collecting and listening activity was for pure enjoyment, as there was, in Hatfield's words, quote, "definitely a world music zeitgeist forming," close quote. Some of the most important recordings that had a profound effect on Hatfield's compositional techniques were Steve Reich's drumming and other recordings, David Byrne and Brian Eno's My Life in the Bush of Ghosts, David Byrne and the Talking Heads, Remain in Light, and John Fogley's World Sampler tapes. Steve Reich's drumming is a minimalistic piece in 4 movements of 90 minutes of continuous music, released in 1971. Minimalism is defined in Grove's dictionary online as a style of composition characterized by an intentionally simplified rhythmic, melodic, and harmonic vocabulary, which I will note could similarly describe chants and ostinatos. One of the typical characteristics you hear in minimalism are patterns repeated for several minutes. Also present is a chant-like pulsating drone rhythm. Drumming was inspired by Reich's visit to Ghana and observing their music, in particular, their art of drumming. Here is an excerpt. With variations for about 9 more minutes. Hatfield said that drumming made a compelling bridge for me between the new experiments of the avant-garde and the world's ancient musical cultures. Now there was a moment when I really understood how all these different musical styles and musical concerns were springing from and heading back to the same source, close quote. If you recall Hatfield's previous comments, he highly values the ability of music to transcend time, having the ancient relevant to the present. Another Reich recording would influence Hatfield's core writing is Reich's Come Out. Of this, he said, "Come Out was very important in making me feel the rhythms in speech." Close quote. In this sampling from Come Out, you will hear 5 sections of this piece, where each section has 1 or more added audio loops starting at slightly different times, and this is called phasing.
I had to open the bruise up and let some of the bruised blood come out to show them. I had to open the bruise up and let some of the bruised blood come out to show them. Come out to show them, 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 come out to show them.
You won't hear that on the radio very much. As you hear Hatfield's compositions, you will find highly rhythmic text patterns set to chants and ostinatos. David Byrne's revolutionary work with his group The Talking Heads and with producer Brian Eno was another influence not only on Stephen Hatfield's composing technique, but also on how it shaped his philosophical approach to writing choral music. Of the track, Help Me Somebody, from the album My Life in the Bush of Ghosts, Hatfield says, I remember being very taken with the juxtaposition of ostinati that growl and pop and sizzle with those that float. The sense of rapid time and slow time combined had me hooked. As you listen to a sample of that track, note the variety of ostinatos in each instrument. You will hear long chords on a couple of electric guitars, a rapid pulsating part played on the congas simultaneously with another electric guitar, the bass guitar in and out on a quarter note riff, and a looped short sampling of vocal speech. Now listen to the 3 ostinato textures from this excerpt from Down Low.
What picks you up, what calls you, let me dreams you away, the daylight, let me light you away and lights you down.
I will refer to the Talking Heads album Remain in Light later in the lecture. Hatfield happened to take a class in music taught by John Fawlty at the University of Toronto. Because of Fawlty's keen interest in world music, Hatfield was a recipient of 2 world sampler tapes compiled by Fawlty of ethnocultural music recordings from around the world. Hatfield says of these tapes that they were, quote, a colossal consciousness raiser and deserves a place on the short list of important events in my musical education, close quote. 3 of the recordings from these world music tapes were named by Hatfield as transforming in his mind. The first is of a type of trumpet created from the root of trees hollowed out by termites. These are performed by the men of the Broto tribe in the Central African Republic. Hatfield says this sound file, quote, completely and thoroughly influenced my idea of ostinato, riff, funky counterpoint, and also the call to arms relationship between soloist and chorus. Let's hear some ostinato riffs in funky counterpoint from the first movement of 3 Ways to Vacuum Your House. The second is an excerpt from a recording of 2 young girls in the Republic of Burundi in a greeting with each other. Hatfield says that, quote, this is a sound my mind pursues in many direct and indirect ways. I am interested if I can get some of this transparent delicacy to happen, even though in a choir you have several voices on each part. The third recording is an Ndokpa from the Grimari region of Central Africa. Ndokpa means an instrumental language. This recording is a weather forecast, and this is a translation. It rained just now, it will be fine tomorrow. The tonal inflections of the language is transcribed into xylophone pitches. This is a demonstration by steps leading to the xylophone giving the weather forecast on its own. Of its influence, Hatfield says, quote, this was not the first time I had heard percussion used as talking drums, but this snippet really rearranged my DNA. It was the rhythm as much as the pitch. The movement and snap of the language grabbed me as much as the tonal properties. I think my ability to really fuse the diction of the text to the movement of the pitches recognized this brief field recording as an artisan well, close quote. In preparing my dissertation by studying and reading the hundreds of emails from Stephen Hatfield and by studying his music, it has become crystal clear to me that in composing music, Hatfield's ultimate priority is the singer's experience, more so than the creating of art. He wishes the singer to develop empathy for his fellow man and also to grow individually through self-awareness and discovery. This drives every note and lyric that he pens. There is a greater chance of the singer having such experiences if the singer is interested and vested in the music. Therefore, he composes so that all voice parts are musically and rhythmically interesting. This had its origins when he taught the extracurricular choir at Cawthra Park High School, needing to keep a large number of students with a wide range of skills engaged in rehearsal. Of this he said, quote, I wanted to avoid the situation where 3/4 of the choir waits while you go over and over some harmony part. Meantime, the sopranos who traditionally get the melody have picked their part up right away and are now bored out of their minds. There are many variations on this scenario, but they all result in boredom for one part of the choir and frustration for another. I take particular care that the altos get lots of spotlight, since in my experience they are the section most likely to be passed over by composer and audience alike. Close quote. Those of you who have sung or are singing in choir can probably relate to this in one degree or another. This influence comes from the Talking Heads album, Remain in Light. Hatfield tells of this influence, quote, Remain in Light sparked a lot of journalistic interest in the ethos of African music, which was well known to have fueled this record. I remember being very influenced by the point often made at the time of the record's release. Whereas in Western music, one tended to focus on the lead singer or the lead guitarist or the conductor or the solo violinist, etc. In an African pattern, everybody was equally important in creating the effect, whether you were doing a complicated figure on a drum or keeping a steady cowbell on the second beat of every measure. The second cowbell was as important as the lead djembe, and the line between performers and dancing audience was continually removed. Community, community, community. Close quote. Hatfield further explains that, quote, the discussion of how African music espouses the community had a huge impact on how I wrote for the different voices in the choir. My desire to make all voices in the choir feel equally important, to give every voice some spotlight in every piece. This led to developing charts which, though harmonically straightforward, were polyphonic in texture, giving each vocal part melodic lines and catchy ostinati so that nobody felt that their place in the choir was to give tuneless support to the tune. Close quote. Hatfield uses ostinatos to create emotion and moods. He says that they create a sense of reliability and continuity, an emotional, psychological touchstone. Quote, the repetition of ostinatos can create a timeless dream world, while at the same time, the repetition can create an increasing sense of imminent explosion, an increasing sense of pressure. Close quote. For example, in Down Low with Finesse, Hatfield says that the ostinatos, quote, often suggest a giddy, dizzy, hyperventilating, disoriented mental landscape that are intended to suggest the pressure in the personia's head and the pressure which she perceives to be around her.
For reasons I just can't determine, 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 there's a reason I just can't determine.
As this persona sings through the ostinatos, Hatfield explains the repetitive drive of the ostinati enables the singer to absorb the potentially threatening energy of the ostinato and transform it into a positive groove, full of energy, positive energy, and a sense of self-humor.
Not alone, you can't help it, you're not alone. You can't help it, you're not alone. You can't help it, you're not alone. You can't help it.
Now that we have established Stephen Hatfield's building blocks, I will discuss his three idiomatic compositional techniques, namely the Hatfield hybrid, the deep Hatfield hybrid, and the cultural mashup. Much of Hatfield's work is composed of traditional source material combined with his original material, whether that be text, melodic material, or both. This technique is called the Hatfield hybrid. First, let us explore the concept of combining traditional material with original text. At times he hears a charming traditional tune, he will set original text to it and make it his own. Such was the case when he heard a tin whistle street musician in Belfast playing the tune Cape Breton Jigs McGurk's. In his work, Blonde with a black skirt, Hatfield took this tune, then added what he calls text that is modeled on the crazy quilt of village gossip, work songs, and nonsense refrains used in so many folk tunes. The instrumental ensemble will now play the first tunes of this jig. An example of a Hatfield hybrid with added original musical material can be found in the piece Las Amarillas, a folk song. Folk songs are highly repetitive. Hatfield says, quote, "I wanted choirs to have the chance to sing these folk songs that were just shivering my timbers. I felt the missionary's zeal to pass on the bliss. But these songs tended to be very strophic, and overall I found that identical verses, verse after verse, is the province of the soloist, not the choir, not without an added element of change to offset and relieve the repetitive nature of the genre," close quote. Sopranos 1 and 2 will sing the 6-bar traditional melody, which in the original folk song repeats for several verses. To make each verse interesting, Hatfield adds ostinato to accompany the melody. One such example is this alto counter rhythm ostinato with body percussion. Hatfield also inserts original linking material between the verses. In this next example, he uses the syllable na and no from the source lyrics, alla tirana no. You will hear other exciting linking material using these syllables in the performance. The second idiomatic style I will discuss is the deep Hatfield hybrid. This is where he assimilates aspects of a cultural style, be it rhythm, harmony, or melodic movement, and then writes, quote, in that style without quoting any actual melodies from that culture, close quote. One such example is the four-movement Missa Primavera, Our Lady of the Spring. In the first movement of Missa Primavera, the rhythmic and melodic contour of the Kyrie is influenced by a Bulgarian folk song, Polignala e Todora. The rhythmic pattern of Polignala follows the 2 plus 2 plus 3 plus 2 plus 2 meter of the Bulgarian dance Kopanica, described as a quick, quick, slow, quick, quick line dance. Hatfield uses this meter pattern in the thematic statement of the Kyrie. Hatfield says of this Bulgarian influence that in comparison of the two melodic phrases, there are, quote, similarities between the rhythmic and melodic contour, close quote, and pointed out that both melodies have, quote, the same melodic turn when the phrase ends, close quote. The opening theme of Kyrie also employs a pentatonic scale typical for Bulgarian folk dances. Down Low with Finesse is another example of a deep Hatfield hybrid. It assimilates aspects of funk rock, particularly that of the previously discussed album Remain in Light by the Talking Heads. Let's listen to a track, Houses in Motion, from that album that particularly deeply connected with Hatfield. Some of you aren't tapping your foot or bobbing your head. So now let's hear a section from Down Low with Finesse. The third Hatfield idiomatic style I will discuss is his cultural mashup, in which two or more cultural materials, styles, or influences may be combined in one work. Just think of this as food fusion. Here in the Old Pueblo, we have cuisines such as Sri Lankan meets Southwestern, Chinese Caribbean, Indian Honduran, and the likes of Korean tacos and kimchi quesadillas, and many others. Some of those cuisines combine similar elements, some of them combine dissimilar elements. The same goes for Hatfield's cultural mashups, combining related elements together and or combining unrelated, even opposing elements. Let us consider the three-movement work, 3 Ways to Vacuum Your House. And yes, Hatfield says the title is literal. Quote, all of those licks and riffs came from improvising while I was vacuuming. He calls vacuum, quote, perhaps one of my best achievements in the sphere of cultural mashup. The first movement imitates drumming patterns from Arabia. It also imitates the Zimbabwe mbira, or Shona thumb piano, whose rhythmic patterns are superimposed with an altered melodic line from the Scottish folk tune, the Sky Boat Song. Let's listen to an excerpt of the Arabian drumming patterns. The sopranos and altos will now perform part of vacuum in, sopranos and altos will now perform an excerpt from Vacuum. Here is the first part of the Skyboat Song.
Sleep on a boat like a bird on the wing.
And here it is as it appears in vacuum in an altered form. Finally, for consideration as a cultural mashup is the piece Sweet Tooth. Hatfield combines the related elements of speaking to animals, the Australian Aborigines' dreamtime state to speak with snakes, and the Congo Pygmies' honey-gathering ritual to charm the bees. You will hear two recordings. The first is of the Australian Aborigines, and the second is of the Pygmy honey-gathering ritual, in which you will hear a distinctive four-note descending ostinato on "yeah-oh." Now you will hear the baritones demonstrate one of their ostinatos. In conclusion, I would like to revisit the quotes I read at the beginning. Dr. Holmquist. Hatfield's music is an ideal teaching tool, simultaneously engaging the mind, body, and spirit. All of his work is so appealing and well-crafted that singers enjoy the process of discovery that the music invariably offers. Each and every piece has interesting yet challenging material for each voice part, possesses a depth of meaning, and feels good to the voice. Chilcott. His voice is completely unique in the choral world, and no choir should be without his music in their repertoire. Ashworth Bartle, a genius. I agree with their assessment of Stephen Hatfield's music, and so would the singers in my choirs over the last 2 decades that have performed his music. I hope that you have enjoyed learning about this fascinating man and his fascinating music. It has been a wonderful journey for both Stephen and me over the last few years. Thank you again so much for coming, and now the choir will give a performance of the pieces that were mentioned in this lecture.
reasons I just can't determine. For reasons I just can't determine. For reasons I just can't determine. For reasons I just can't determine. There's a reason I just can't determine.